Welcome to the Grand Theatre National Opera in Warsaw. It is here where the premiere of the new operatic title, The Best City in the World, an opera about Warsaw, took place. This is an opera about the capital city, Warsaw, rising from the rubble and ashes of World War II, and it is my absolute pleasure to speak to the director of the opera who's joining me today, Barbara Wiśniewska. Basiu, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Zacznijmy od samego początku.
Let's start from the very beginning. Grzegorz Piątek's book was an inspiration behind this opera. Why this particular book, and why was it vital for this premiere to take place this year?
This book is a unique description of what happened to Warsaw after World War II, what the reconstruction efforts looked like. The 80th anniversary of the reconstruction is celebrated this very year, in 2025, so we, the creators of this opera, wanted to make it happen. I began working on this project 2 years ago, and the general coordinator of this project, Jarosław Trybusz, started working on it 4 years ago.
We had this conversation before because this is not the first time we meet. We both hail from Warsaw. Our families come from this city. Why is Warsaw such a special place, and what speaks for its uniqueness to an extent where you made the decision to make a whole opera dedicated to the subject, and such a special opera no less?
Warsaw is a city that survived its own death. It was the place to be for so many, regardless of how difficult the return after World War II would be. We need to remember that after the war, nobody was sure what would happen with the city. The communist authorities wanted to move the capital to Łódź. They believed reviving Warsaw could never happen. The idea of bringing back to life a city so obliterated, so destroyed. But its former inhabitants returned. They came back. They wanted the city to be born anew. And when people feel such a need, the need to make something impossible possible, they will always succeed.
Biorąc pod uwagę, że czerpałaś pewne elementy.
You borrowed some elements of this opera and the creation process from the history of your own family. What were they? What were the things that helped you get closer to that moment in history and the emotional headspace to be able to convey your message to your audience?
The history of post-war Warsaw is the history of many families, including my own. My great-great-great-grandmother or my grandmother's grandmother was the first generation to move here. And I really wanted to capture individual stories, both mine and those of other Warsavians. When we look at this opera, there are mainly crowd scenes, choral scenes, and a choir. These are the residents. And why would I search the archives when I have my own family album? If I can, for example...
A true treasure trove.
This is absolutely wonderful. If I can, for example, draw inspiration for costumes from what I actually have in my own family archives and what I get from my own grandmother. My grandmother also told me lots of stories about what happened during the war and what happened immediately after the war. My grandmother was also an electrical engineer. She was also involved in the reconstruction of the city. And this city came to be because the inhabitants who were involved in the process of making it happen truly wanted it to materialize.
Tell me, was this creative process challenging for you considering the extent of Warsaw's destruction and the sheer number of civilians, not just those directly involved in the fighting, but also civilians who died in Warsaw, those buried under the rubble? Was it difficult to take these stories and develop them in a way that would transform them into a work of art?
Proces przygotowawczy był bardzo wyczerpujący emocjonalnie.
The preparation process was emotionally draining. Reading archival papers, revisiting what happened to residents, walking over corpses, passing through all the buildings, streets, memorials, places where information about the fallen simply appeared. Of course, all this history didn't just disappear without a trace, so it's emotionally draining. I was very keen to do this with respect and to ensure that the story we were telling was told with dignity and integrity. I didn't set out to create a documentary.
Seeing as you directed this opera, which was staged here at the Grand Theatre National Opera, do you feel like you've contributed to the reconstruction process? Does this feel like the end of a creative process after 80 years when it comes to Warsaw's reconstruction?
What you said is very beautiful. I would agree. I think the process of building Warsaw is still ongoing. I don't think I'm the last link in this process.
Will the reconstruction ever come to a definite end?
It seems to me that this is a city that's still alive, still pulsating, vibrating, and that can't be easily contained or pigeonholed. I hope it will continue to develop for many, many years to come, and that we won't finish the process like so many European capitals, which have already become ossified. Nothing can be done there anymore. Nothing can be built or recreated. We can only edit what has happened. And here, there are still undiscovered areas.
So the initial plan of Helena Syrkus, one of the lead protagonists of your story, continues.
Tak, uważam, że tak. Co prawda Helenę poznajemy.
Yes, I think it does. It's true that we get to know Helena in our opera, and we meet her at a point when she says that Warsaw will undergo a phase of great destruction. She uttered the same words that many pre-war architects repeated, that this city is overpopulated, unfit for living, and that it needs to be completely rebuilt, recreated. And so it happened. Warsaw was destroyed, just not in the way the architects had expected. They expected to be able to remodel it like Paris was remodeled, piece by piece, house by house. But instead, it turned out that the entire city had been razed to the ground.
No właśnie, nakreślmy pewien taki...
Exactly. Let's sketch a portrait, both a character portrait and a psychological one of both of these heroines, because that's also, I think, a very important element of this opera, that we have two heroines who really guide us through this piece. Helena Syrkus, the architect, as we mentioned earlier, and Anne-Louise Strong, the journalist.
And Warsaw.
And Warsaw, indeed. We have three women. Tell me more about these women. How did you juxtapose these two characters so that they had something in common, but yet they were completely different at the same time, to present a certain dynamic?
One są z zupełnie różnych światów. Helena Syrkus jest przedwojenną...
They are from completely different worlds. Helena Syrkus is a pre-war modernist, a translator of Le Corbusier, who spent the war in Warsaw, and despite her Jewish roots and very Semitic appearance, managed to survive essentially unscathed. Only at the very end did she end up in a transition camp near Wrocław, while her husband, Szymon Syrkus, spent the entire period of occupation in Auschwitz. And then Helena Syrkus became deeply disillusioned with modernism. After the war, she became deeply involved in the reconstruction process. In the second part, she meets our other character, Anne-Louise Strong. Anna is an American fascinated by communism. From the very beginning, she comes to Warsaw with the Red Army to write a book, to write a story about whether the city could be rebuilt. These are completely two different people. They represent completely different personalities, different characters.
Wcześniej w naszej rozmowie wspomniałaś o tym, że
We mentioned earlier in this conversation that the protagonists of your opera are three women. At the very beginning and throughout the opera, a man also appears in a form of a narrator. What prompted this choice? Why not a fourth woman? Where did the need for a male narrator come from?
Cezary Duchnowski, pisząc muzykę do tej opery,
When Cezary Duchnowski wrote the music for this opera, he wrote it for our two soloists, the ones you see on stage, Agata Zubel and Joanna Reszel. They are two sopranos, two outstanding creators of contemporary music, two outstanding soloists. And these two voices were intended to be the leading voices. But there was also a need to balance the situation. So we based it somewhat on Józef Sigalin, the architect of the reconstruction, the person who, for many years, led all the preparatory work and all the construction work. There was also a narrator. The narrator is a person who guides us in a different way, who speaks to us.
This music isn't simple. It's not what people might expect when they come to see an opera. Where did the idea come from, and do you think that this music is exactly what allowed you to achieve the effect you were looking for as a director?
jak opowiadać o wojnie prostą muzyką? ta historia nie jest...
How do you tell the story of war with simple music? This story isn't simple. This story has never been simple. And the multiplicity, complexity, and number of voices that wanted to tell it influence how Cezary, thinking about this work, created it. So yes, this music is difficult. This music is demanding. There's a lot of noise, a lot of electronics, a lot of loud passages, and a lot of percussions. But I think the anxiety it carries is the anxiety that accompanies our protagonists. And I think that against this backdrop, hope, which is the final thought of the entire performance, can resonate best. I'm very glad that Cezary wrote the score from start to finish.
Wiem, że nie będę jedyną osobą, która
I know I won't be the only person who's probably discussed this with you, but from my experience after the premiere, I was absolutely delighted with the set design. The approach to the set design really made a huge impression on me and I know other viewers. There were also scenes that weren't easy because they had to depict certain historical events while respecting them and approaching them with emotion, but without imposing on the viewer a particular perspective on the process of reconstruction. Because for many, it was truly a funeral. It was, in a sense, a death of a city, as you mentioned earlier. Where did the idea for this set design come from, and how did you avoid certain clichés associated with historical events?
Bardzo zależało nam na tym, żeby nie powielać obrazów, które już wszyscy znamy.
We were so focused on not imposing anything, not duplicating images we all already know, but creating a new narrative. And how can we create a new narrative when we've been fed the same images of war and reconstruction, of socialist realism since we were children? So our core creative team at the very beginning, when we were still submitting the competition concept, was Marcin Cecko, the playwright, Natalia Kitamikado, the set designer, and me. And the three of us sat down together. We considered what we needed, how to set the turning points, what was most important, what kind of images we wanted to use. And Natalia did a beautiful job here. I'm absolutely thrilled that this set design is so refined, so precise. What was important? It was important to tell the story through metaphor.
Finally, I wanted to touch on a more personal topic with you. This premiere, this work, is a huge triumph for you, something you've worked on very hard for a very long time. This culmination of an entire creative process, from your perspective, from the other side, what advice would you give to young directors who would like to find themselves in your shoes, looking back at the process you've gone through to reach this point in your life?
Uczę teraz studentów na Akademii Teatralnej i rozmawiamy.
I'm currently teaching students at the Warsaw Theatre Academy, and we talk about this a lot. I think the most important thing is not to compromise. No matter how difficult the path is, no matter how demanding, when you reach that place you've dreamed of for so many years, and when you get there knowing that you owe it to your hard work, it's incomparable. So I encourage my students to be true to themselves and to follow their hearts, to pursue what interests them, what they love, because at some point it will definitely bear fruit.
Basiu, bardzo dziękuję Ci, że...
Basia, thank you so much for finding the time to speak to me. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And so this marks the end of our interview. My guest was Barbara Wiśniewska, the director of The Best City in the World, an opera about Warsaw. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more.